right, Gary, we are rocking and rolling. So we're going to do things a little bit differently today, everybody. Today I have with me guest Gary Osborn. I want to give him a quick little intro, and we're going to go through a PowerPoint presentation on the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident from 1980. So real quick, we have Gary Osborn here today. He's an independent researcher, author, deep thinker who spent years uncovering hidden threads that weave together ancient wisdom, esoteric symbolism, and high strangeness. He's the co-author of the Giza Prophecy, which is a groundbreaking book that suggests the pyramids of Egypt are more than just monumental tombs, and they may actually encode a prophetic timeline tied to consciousness and cataclysm. He's also the co-author of the Rendlesham Enigma, which is what we're going to be discussing today and in future podcasts. That's a riveting investigation into one of the most famous UFO encounters in history. Alongside Staff Sergeant Jim Penniston, Gary dives into a deep mystery of the binary code that was received during this incident in 1980 Rendlesham Forest. And that code just might be pointing to a non-human intelligence, and has also led Gary to some staggering discoveries along the Giza Plateau, which we're going to get into in future podcasts. But Gary, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Great to officially have you on here. We've been talking for some time now. How are you?
Yeah, it's about time. Thanks for having me on.
Very good. So what we're going to do is I'm going to be going through the slides, and Gary's going to interject as we go through the incident, the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident. And we're going to be going through about 32 slides, and this should be super informative to everybody and a good little foundation for future podcasts into the code, which should be pretty awesome. Okay, so here we have the Rendlesham incident, and just so everybody knows, Gary put together this presentation for all of us to take a look at.
Yeah, I just want to say this has never been done before, podcast or presentation before on the Rendlesham incident. What I mean is these graphics and these photos, these images have never been shown in a podcast interview with Jim Penniston.
And
This is the first.
Yes, it is a first. And just everybody should know that before we get started here, Jim Penniston was the one who put his hand on the craft in 1980. And I've gone through these slides with Jim Penniston as well. And when I've had a couple of phone call conversations with him as well. So I've gone through this incident, and I feel I know it pretty well, along with multiple conversations with Gary over the last several months. So here we have a picture of the Woodbridge Air Base here in Suffolk, England. And
Actually, that first one is Ben Waters.
This is Ben Waters, RAF Ben Waters.
That's the Ben Waters base.
Okay, RAF Ben Waters.
And the one that we're mostly interested in is Woodbridge, because
So here we have RAF Woodbridge. It's in Suffolk, England. This is an aerial view of the location, showing the location of the East Gate. The East Gate is where they entered into the forest over there on the right side of the slide there. And this is a Google slide from a picture from 2000. And I guess you snatched it from Google Earth Pro 2018, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
Is there anything else you want to talk about this aerial photo?
No, just this, because the Woodbridge base was close to where this unidentified triangular craft landed. And Jim Penniston was sent there to investigate. John Burroughs and Staff Sergeant Bud Stephan, that's Light in the Woods.
Okay. And so this is a close-up of the East Gate. So this is the location of the original East Gate at RAF Woodbridge in December 1980, from which the dark line across the road still exists. The foundation remains of the East Gate hut or sentry post can also be seen. And the location of the high security gate that exists today is exactly 300 feet from the original gate due east along the East Gate Road. And this is a satellite image from 2007 that I guess you got from Google Pro in 2018. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And just so the audience knows, Woodbridge is no longer an active base at this time, correct?
It was loaned to the USAF by the RAF. There were bases during the Second World War, and they were loaned to the USAF because of the Cold War. And Jim was part of a security detail. In fact, he in charge of the security. I think he was only one of 8 people who had top secret clearance at the base.
Can you speak to the nuclear storage there?
Yeah, I think that's in Bentwaters. There's a weapons storage area there, which has had nuclear ordnance at that time. Of course, it wasn't public. It was on the public record that they did. And by all accounts, that's where they kept the nuclear weapons.
And Bentwaters, was that just across the forest?
Yeah, that's both bases are adjacent to the Rendlesham Forest. Woodbridge is closer to where they saw this light land in the forest.
And where Jim and Burroughs and Steffens and Cabot
Yeah.
were all assigned.
That's right. We'll go through that. If you go to the next slide.
Yep. So you can see the east gate here. And so we have something called the T-junction at the eastern end of East Gate Road, exactly 700 yards, 640 meters from the east gate, where Staff Sergeant Steffens stopped the patrol car and turned it around.
Yeah, so let's go from the beginning.
Okay.
John Burroughs was at law enforcement, and he was by the East Gate. He was patrolling the East Gate. And he says he got a call from Staff Sergeant Steffens, Bud Steffens, who asked him, do you want to go out in the car and just patrol the area together so we can have a chat and get to know each other? Because Steffens had only been there for just under 3 months.
Okay.
Working at Woodbridge. So they were both in their patrol cars, is what Burroughs said. Steffens pulled up in his patrol car. Burroughs got out of his car and got in with Steffens. And as they're patrolling the perimeter of the base, they go out actually to that T-junction. And that's when Staff Sergeant Steffens saw this bright light in the woods. And he went, wow, have you ever seen anything like that? Said Burroughs. I said, no, I've never seen anything like that. It was unusual to them. They've seen lots of lights. They've seen planes and choppers landing and all that sort of thing, but this was something different. And they saw it was in the woods. It seems as if it landed in the woods. And what they saw was this kind of like if you put a glass bowl upside down, it's like light which was emanating from the craft wasn't diffuse like how the darkness.
It was defined.
Yeah, there was like a distinct line that was cut with a light. And that looked really strange to them. They've never seen anything like that before. They phoned in, went to the Eastgate shack where there was a phone. Burroughs called it in. As they rushed back to the Eastgate shack after that.
Okay.
They called it in, and Jim Penniston, who was on duty with, was it McCulley? Yeah. Sergeant McCulley, because they're in law enforcement, and they were just going around the perimeter, checking lights, all that kind of thing, which is what they usually do. This was all Christmas night, by the way. This was the last hour of Christmas Day.
So 1980, December 25th, we're like at 11 something.
Around about 11 o'clock.
Yeah, at night.
Burroughs and Steffens saw the light. Cool. Yeah, by the time they got back, it was almost 12 midnight. Jim Penniston took a call, control center. They asked him to go out and see what Burroughs and Steffens were seeing.
Now, he's their commanding officer, right? He's the staff sergeant. He's in charge of them.
It's a different detail. The law enforcement, John Burroughs and Steffens were law enforcement, and Jim Penniston was security.
Okay.
But I'm sure he had, I think he outranked those two anyway. I'm sure he had security. He picked up the call while he was in the chow hall, the Woodbridge. And
is this when he gets the response here at 12:20?
No, he got the response just a few minutes after midnight.
Okay.
And he didn't know what this was because apparently, I think it was Dave Coffey who rang through from the control center. And he said, we've got a pseudo event here out. So Jim said, what do you mean by pseudo incident or event. They said, I can't tell you. We just want you to go out there and check it out and see what they're talking about, what Steffens and Burroughs are talking about.
Okay.
So Jim tested it. He said, can it wait? Because I've only just sat down and had me coffee and roll sandwich. And no, they said, no, you've got to get out there immediately. Yeah, because he's sitting across from Sergeant McCulley. And he said, I've got to go. I've got to go to the East Gate. I've been sent there to check out this weird incident or something that's happening. Yeah, he drove to the East Gate. Now, yeah, that image is his notebook.
So we should probably tell everybody that Jim Penniston, Staff Sergeant Penniston, was a copious note taker, and he always had this little notebook on him.
Yeah, and he made sure that the people under him who were in his team also had them, because they could jot down any problem or anything that they encountered if they were while on duty. And this is a thing with this date at the top of this page here. Jim Penniston also had flight tests given to him by one of people who were over him, saying that he would have to go to these flight tests. And so he'd be given a date when the next one would be. So when people have looked at this, when the debunkers of the incident, the Rendlesham incident, in Ridpath have looked at this page, and they see the date at the top, and they say, that's the 27th of December, 80.
Right.
But Jim was sent to the East Gate on the morning of the 26th. That's wrong. But actually, it isn't even 27. It's
29.
It's 29. And Jim, the way he writes his nines, it's like a very closed loop at the top. It looks like a 7, but it's actually 29. And in another instance where it's written down 29, 9, and you'll see that that's how he writes his 9s.
Right.
When he writes his 7s, he puts a dash through the stem.
What do we know the significance of the 29?
Yeah, but that was a flight exercise, as I said, a flight test.
Okay, so that's the flight exercise is what the 29.
He jotted down before he got to the East Gate.
Okay.
Because one of his superiors said, yeah, we got a flight exercise on the 29th.
Okay. So that's what that's
so
from.
he jotted that down at the top. It had nothing to do with the incident. And he just, because when he shut his notebook, he put his pen where the last page was written. He put his,
so then he just started writing.
He started from that page again, yeah.
So he's got AC crash, which is aircraft crash, adjacent East Gate. So this is like the first little bit of notes he's taking. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so here we are.
To the East Gate. That's when he got to the East Gate.
Okay.
When he got to the East Gate, Staff Sergeant Bud Steffens came walking over to him. And Jim got out and he said, what's up? What's going on? What's wrong with Burroughs? Because he saw Burroughs was in a kind of agitated state. He said, no, don't worry about it. He said, look where I'm pointing. And he's looked on his arm and he was pointing to the woods. And he says, you see that? He said, yeah, what is it? He said, is it a crash? Because Jim's dealt with a lot of plane crashes in the past.
He was a first responder.
Yeah. And he said, no, Jim, it landed.
Right.
What do you mean landed? I said, you in a chopper? He said, no, it's just this light just came down and it landed. And John Burroughs blurted out, we think it's a UFO. So Jim looked at him as if to say, yeah, incredulous about what he just said. I said, what am I going to do? I've got to phone this through.
Right.
To the control center and tell them that UFOs landed. He said, so he put that out of his mind. He said, I'm going to call it through. So he called it through and he said, something's landed in the woods. It landed, but it could be a plane crash. And
maybe we should express like the severity of that. Because if it's known that you've got nuclear weapons in the area and, your security for this airfield, this army base, you have to treat this very seriously. You have to treat this. There could be a serious situation in the vicinity. So he calls it in.
Yeah, Jim was trusted with this. He's well respected by his superiors. They had Jim handle it. That's why they sent him out. Yeah, he calls it in, and while he's talking to the control center, there's kind of other people on the phone. I think Master Sergeant Chandler, a few others were listening in, Lieutenant Buran, they were all listening in. And after they heard what Jim said, because Jim wasn't going to say it's a UFO, he just dismissed that. So it must be a crash or something out there. But he said, what I can see is this kind of dome of light. And he said, that's really strange because, as he said, the light's not diffusing. It's
Right.
cut
It was
off.
contained almost.
Yeah, contained. And he said, that looks really weird. But he said he was seeing blue and red lights and he couldn't smell anything because he thought if it was a plane crash, you would smell like titanium
fuel.
burning and fuel burn. Yeah. Couldn't smell anything. That was weird as well, he said. After
Now,
that,
they are at a distance at this point. They're not right up next to it at this point.
they're not right up next to it. No, they're looking
Not
from
yet.
the east gate. They're looking from where the east gate is because that's where
Right. So they're not up to it yet, but they can
No.
see the light.
it's where he rendezvoused with Burroughs and Steffens. Steffens has never come forward, by the way. He's never gone on the record about what he witnessed that morning. Yeah, no one's been able to contact him. Don't know where he's gone. Anyway, so, yeah, after he told Control Center what he was seeing, a report came through that a bogey had been seen over that area. A UFO, an unidentified craft of some kind, was picked up on radar. And they told Jim that. So Jim thought, that's really strange. What? And they said it came down in Rendlesham Woods near Woodbridge. This must be what they're looking at.
Okay.
Jim was told to leave his guns behind, leave their guns, M16s and, leave them behind because they're going because they was going to be sent out to investigate. And they're
Right. Because now they're no
Queen's
longer
Forest.
on the base. Now they're on the Queen's Forest.
And they're not allowed to have guns or
Right. They're in the Queen's land. They're not supposed to be carrying weapons.
not carrying weapons, no. So they handed them over to whoever was there at the time. I think it was Steffens who actually took her because he asked if Steffens wanted to go along. Burroughs wasn't his first choice. He was wanting Steffens to go with him. But Steffens said, I don't want anything to do with this. Steffens was worried. It spooked him that much because he was a religious guy. But Burroughs said, yeah, I'll go.
You wanted to check it out.
Jim said, okay. And also they had Cavansack.
Cabin sag, yeah.
Yeah, that's how you pronounce it. It looks Cabansag.
Cabin sag, yeah.
Pronounce it Cavansack.
So that's three of them get in the Jeep and they go.
The three of them get in the Jeep. Jim's driving.
They leave
So
the
they
East
head out.
Gate.
Yeah, they head
And-
down the Eastgate Road.
Yep.
They get to the T-junction where Steffens and Burroughs had stopped. And then they go they turn right.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go down the logging road.
285 yards
Yeah.
to that sort of clearing patch, right?
Yeah. It's a clear, what it is, there were young trees that had just been planted there.
Do we show this slide? Can you see this?
Yeah. So in the middle there, you'll see that field there is clear.
And that's where they had to stop. And you can
And
see
that
it
was
back
in
on
the-
this map here.
Yeah.
You can see the clearing here, this little squared out section in the middle of the picture.
That's right.
They took the Jeep as far as they could. And
Yeah, because it felt as if the Jeep was going to turn over, roll over.
Yeah, 'cause there was-
the ground was
there
so
was big undulating ground
Yeah.
and they couldn't go any further.
No,
At this point, they go on foot, correct?
yeah, they leave the Jeep there.
Just so everybody, I don't know if everybody can see this, but in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little lighted area.
That's
This
where the
is
light
where
is.
this is where the triangular craft that they came upon was located.
Yeah,
but okay, go ahead.
Later would find that out. But that's where Jim said it was round about there. That's where they could see. So Jim stopped the Jeep some 50 yards into that clearing. And he thought that would make a good entry control point. Other responders turn up with their fire trucks or whatever they needed, whatever this incident was. So he thought, oh yeah, and he gave the coordinates for that. And he said because their radios were playing up, it was all static and
Yep.
each other properly. He said to Gavansack, could you stay with the Jeep and act as relay?
That's like the control point, he called it.
He gave Gavansack one of the radios out of the Jeep and he took the other one, and him and Burroughs walked towards the light and left Kavansag with the
At the Jeep.
yeah.
So they're
And
walking.
in Burroughs' testimony, he says that Kavansag was with him all the time. But Jim said, no, that's not what happened. He said he did leave him with the Jeep. He may have come over later. He may have made his way over there, but there's no real proof of that. Because apparently Master Sergeant Chandler was going to meet up at that, what Jim was calling the entry control point. He was going to go and relieve Kavansag and stay with the Jeep himself. He hadn't arrived yet. So in the meantime, John Burroughs and Jim Penniston were making their way towards whatever this light was.
And this is a
So
note.
this page here, it shows that here, it says Kavansag posted Login Road, possible entry control point, having CSC, the control center.
Yep, the control center point. And that's
back the coordinates there. And the time was 12:51 now.
so he's checking the time as this is all going through. Got on his notebook.
That's right.
Now we're at 12:51.
Yeah.
Kavansag is at the Jeep, and he and Burroughs are off on foot walking towards the light.
Yeah.
So this is just a slide showing where Jim came from, right?
Yeah, he was at the chow hall when he got the call, and that's the route or the route he took to the East Gate.
So he gets in one of the Jeeps, drives around this way to the East Gate.
Yeah, he drove down this road adjacent to the runway to the East Gate.
Okay. So now back to the control point here, and they're on foot, and you've outlined this route that they're taking.
So the best of Jim's knowledge. Yeah.
The best of Jim's knowledge. So what you've got here is the route that Staff Sergeant Jim Penniston and Airman Burroughs had taken by foot after exiting the Jeep at the entry control point, was parked some 50 yards, 45 meters to the field after Airman Kavansag was posted by Sergeant Penniston to go back and remain with the Jeep. Jim Penniston maintains that he and Burroughs crossed the open field, which is that little cleared section there.
Yeah.
And they headed eastward some 440 yards, approximately 400 meters towards the source of the lights, which was found to be situated in a clearing just 150 feet from the farmer's field to the east. The journey by foot was approximately 930 yards or 850 meters or about 0.53 of a mile in total. And 585 yards or 536 meters of this journey was covered inside the dense woods of the forest. The coordinates Jim Penniston has now determined for the landing site, where he says he and Burroughs engaged the black triangular craft, are 52 degrees, 5 minutes, 10.78 seconds north, and 1 degree, 27 minutes, and 0.03 seconds east in degrees. Arc minutes and seconds. And then you've got it in decimal degrees there as well.
Yeah.
50.0863278 degrees. And 1.4500083 degrees. Do I have all that correct?
Yeah. You do.
Okay.
Yeah. See, the details are just what was needed really for this, because no one's really presented it like this.
That's why we're doing this. I want to get.
Yeah, I really put Jim through
to establish.
to establish everything about.
Yeah, let's just establish that this happened, that the data and the information is sound. Penniston is a solid witness. I've talked to him multiple times. This happened. And so when he and Burroughs come upon this craft, this is what he sees. And this is obviously a rendition of what he described.
Yeah, to actually saying this, as they were making their way through the woods.
Let's go back a slide so you can tell this. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, as they were making their way to the craft, they heard all this noise and they felt the rumbling going through the ground. And it was all these animals that were rushing away from where this light was. And they saw deer, rabbits, birds all flying out of the trees, going in the other direction where they were heading, running past them. And Jim said he ain't never seen anything like that. That was strange. And at the same time, they were having these kind of electromagnetic effects.
The static was on his skin.
Static on the skin, on the
You feel
clothes.
it.
Felt their head standing up. Yeah. And then after a while, as they were getting closer, it felt like they were wading through water. Something that was this effect that was holding them back almost.
Sluggish, sort of dense atmosphere that was hard to move as they got closer to it.
But they continued, yeah.
And also, I think he was calling back to cabin sag, and the radio was not working properly. Is that correct?
No, and I've got to say that when they exited the Jeep, Kavansag did walk with them for a little while, and that's when Jim said, "No, you need to turn back because of the radio." Because the
right,
playing
you're my link back.
So it's not like they got out of the Jeep and Kavansag stayed there. He walked with them for a bit of the way, and then Jim sent him back.
Okay.
So, yeah, as they came across this light, Jim said that this object, whatever it was in the light, looked kind of dirty, black, grayish, looked dirty. And he said it was, and the light was yellowish white. He couldn't see the craft properly because it was shielded by whatever this field was of light around it.
So this is the dome of light you're describing that stretched out several, like maybe in a radius of 15 feet all around it. I think he said it was.
Well, yeah, that's it. And and Jim thought that really strange. It just gets stranger and stranger.
Yeah.
As they were making their way towards the craft, John Burroughs was getting more and more anxious and uppity. He was nervous. Jim had to keep trying to calm him down, saying, "You need to stay here while I carry on, while I go on. Stay here, and I'll go further, all right?" But he didn't. He kept following. He kept walking after him. Got to a point where there's this berm ridge on the ground, and they climb in that. And as they climbed that and looked over, because they couldn't see anything, I just saw the white light behind it, and they climbed it. And as they climbed it, the craft, wherever it was, exploded into this bright white light. It just lit up. And and Jim said it was like as if a whole kind of car park of cars had all turned their lights on at the same time. And they both dived to the ground because they thought the thing was going to explode. Yeah. So they both dived to the ground. And then Jim went further up onto the top of the berm where he could see it more clearly. Burroughs was behind him. And Burroughs walked up on top of the berm as well. And then Jim walked down the other side of the berm towards him. And John did as well, but he stood and he was frozen. Just as Jim was entering the light, this kind of, we call it the sphere of influence, as he went through the light, John got caught just at the edge of that light. And he was like in this kind of
catatonic state.
Yeah. Deer in the headlights stare.
Yeah. 1,000-yard stare. He's catatonic.
Yeah. And the way Jim described it was he thought that John was a casualty. And he was going to come out of this. But he carried on. And as he said, when he went through that field of this light, everything collapsed. It's like the light, the grayish kind of yellowish light, it all collapsed and everything became more distinct and more, how to put it?
The haziness went away. And
the haziness went away and he could see the craft more clearly. And he said it was a black triangular craft and there were all these lights that were forming on the skin of the craft. And he said it was like one of those lava lamps from the 60s.
Blobs of light going across it.
Color. Yeah. But that they were coming up from the skin of the craft and dissipating again back into the skin of the craft. And he said this was going on, this process of these lights. And he said he thought it was powering down because they were getting slower and slower until they almost stopped and then just disappeared into the skin of the craft. These coloured lights.
So then he begins his investigation of the craft. And so we can see here in this slide, this is basically what he was seeing. I think he said that he thought it was hovering maybe like a couple feet above the ground, but he did inspect it. And I think he saw that there was actually some sort of light landing gear. When I say light landing gear, like the landing gear was, in his words, like made of light. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. This is another strange thing that he witnessed. He said that, and
Because he investigated this thing. He spent some time going around, and we're going to go through his notes here because he took copious notes around it. But he looked under it there, and there was actually depressions, correct?
Yeah, there were these 3 like columns of light. He said it was like large lasers. There's the thickness of these like columns of light. So it was like laser but thicker. And he said that he could see it penetrating the ground. These 3 kind of tripod resting, but it was resting on light, pure light. That's what he said.
And I don't want to skip over this because I don't want to belabor this point, but the next day, and I just want to cover this real quick, he did go back and take plaster casts of the indentations. After this was all said and done and the thing was gone, there was 3 equally spaced, equilaterally spaced depressions in the ground that he took plaster casts of, correct?
Yeah, they were about 9 feet apart. So it was like equilateral, triangle.
Okay. I just wanted to cover that point real quick. I didn't want to miss that. Yeah. So then now he's inspecting this and he begins to take copious notes as he does.
He also took photographs. I think he took 80 photographs. He was just clicking.
Yeah, he went through a whole roll of film.
Yeah, a couple of rolls, I think.
You want to explain what happened to that film?
Yeah, later on he took the film to the photo shop place on the base. He left it with them for a few days and went back to collect photos, and they said they were all whited out. And he later discovered through talking with Monroe Nevels, who was a photographer. Monroe Nevels said it must be the radiation that affected the film.
Exposed the film.
Exposed it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
so here we have his first note that he took. He's describing the light.
After he was taking all his photos, he got his notebook out and he started writing things down.
Large white light, slowing, high intensity, white, blue, red. So he's describing the globules of light, like the lava lamp lights that are enveloped in the skin of this craft.
That's right.
Okay.
Is it the next one?
And now he's writing about the high electric static on the clothes, his skin, his hair, and the aircraft unknown. Do you want to comment on the progression of his handwriting as he's
because as we go on through these images of the notebook pages, you'll see that his writing becomes more like a scribble. It's because he's being affected by the
experience
on the electromagnetic, whatever it was that the craft was giving off. He was affected by it. He was walking very slowly around it. As I said, he felt like he was walking through treacle or water, and his hands were shaking, not just because of fear, because there was a lot of fear as well, and anxiety, but because he was shaking because of what these effects were doing to him.
He was having physical responses.
Yeah. We go on the next one. Yeah.
So now he's noticing no apparent landing gear, no sound, but appears operational somehow.
Yeah, Jim didn't want to say anything about these. It was resting on columns of light. He was going to hand in his notebook. That was his intention. He was going to hand his notebook into the control center.
At the end of all this, he's got to fill out a report because he's a first responder.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the next one.
Yep. So the aircraft is unknown, cannot identify propulsion, unknown. So he's identified this as some kind of a craft that has landed.
Like a flying brick. There was no engine intakes or anything like that.
There's no visible signs of a normal traditional propulsion system.
The back of it was there was like a tail at the back went up, and that's what made it look like a pyramid as well, which resembled a kind of the tail of an aircraft, but it wasn't there.
And
you saw that with the images of the craft earlier. This back of it went up high. Anyway.
Now he's talking about the dimensions. He's estimating this, of course, but he's saying size.
He based his steps, found out it was
about 9 feet long, about 7 or 8 feet high.
3 meters, along each side.
And then this is interesting. He noticed that the skin or the fabric of the craft was a bit warm. He did tell me it was about 32 degrees out, so it was cold. that night in the forest. And he thought that maybe the craft was about 45 degrees because he could feel the difference in the ambient temperature around it. So he did notice that it was slightly warm.
Yeah, still warm after it powered down. Thanks, man.
So there he writes that. It's very warm to touch, identifying markings on the left front side. So this is when things get very interesting because there's what he said had etched marks in it, right? This next slide is going to be pretty much what he saw. Now, he did write these down in the notebook, and we're going to show that here in the next couple slides, but this was the configuration.
Because I asked him, because after I seen what he'd sketched, I wanted something that was more defined. And of course, he's had people try and do their own depictions of what he described, but he said they were never close to what he saw.
Okay.
So we worked together on this, and I did the artworks, but this is closest he's ever got.
And so these are the glyphs on the upper left side of the craft towards the front, as viewed and remembered by Staff Sergeant Jim Penniston. And this is your artwork here. And
he said that was like they were embossed on the side. He said that it was like sandpaper. It was like it was etched into the craft, and the craft was like black glass. Oh my! It was rough where he felt the lines of these glyphs been etched in. They were raised.
And so then he's talking about the length and the height of each symbol. So he says the symbols are about 3 inches in length, but then you've got about, because they're all in order like we have here, this is about 2 feet long from one end to the other, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what he's writing here in his notebook. Again, handwriting's getting a little bit more distressed.
Yeah. Even worse than that as you go on.
And then here he jotted down the
glyphs,
symbols in order as best he could. And he knew the big one, the triangle at the top with the circles, that was the one on top. But he put them in order and he drew them to the best of his recollection. And this is all in real time. I mean, this is the notebook from the night. This is what he's writing as he's seeing it in real time.
Yeah.
So then here he writes, the symbols are etched or engraved, language unknown.
Yeah. He didn't know what the glyphs meant. We did have a laugh about it. He said it could be an advert like drink Coke or something. But he said when he first came across the glyphs, he thought, now there's something to look at that might identify what this craft might be. And he was expecting to see USAF or something, or if it was a Russian craft, hammer and sickle or whatever. But as I said, he saw these glyphs and he couldn't make out what they meant.
All right. So now we got the whole surface of the triangular craft transforming into a bright white light. Now, is this when he put his hand on?
No, when he put yeah, because we skipped that bit.
So let's go back and let's talk about that for a second. So he's taking his hands and he's touching these glyphs. So he understands they're etched into the side of it. And then he takes the palm of his hand and he puts it over the big triangular one at the top. And at that point, he notices that it's enveloped in, like, the white light envelops the whole area. But he said it's not like a light that was hurting his eyes at all.
No, it was as if it was inside his head. And as he was touching that symbol, he could see all these ones and zeros, which he called symbols. But he saw ones and zeros just like going across his mind's eye. And this bright light behind the symbols, behind the ones and zeros. And after that lasted for, I don't know how would he say it, some seconds, it took his hand away and then it all stopped. And then he could see there was no kind of loss of vision like you would with a bright light.
Like his pupils didn't dilate.
No, he could see everything immediately around him. Oh, yeah.
So
as I said, he looked back to John Burroughs and he didn't see him for a while. For some reason, he was out of his vision, and he didn't know what happened to him. Then he looked back later on and he saw him still standing there in the same position as he was. That kind of deer in the headlights stare. And then, yeah,
and just to recap, Burroughs is outside this sort of demarcation line of the dome of light.
Yeah,
which extends about 15 feet out and around radius. So he's outside of that.
Yeah, on the edge of it. And this kind of, the edge of the light was shining down on him as well. It was just on the edge of it. And he said there was no response from him at all. No response. He called him a few times, but there was no response.
He's unresponsive. He's not responding to his name. He's
No.
just in a 1,000-yard stare, catatonic state.
So soon after he took his hand off the symbol and all that kind of stopped, even though he could still see the ones and zeros in his mind, his eye, the craft started to become brighter.
So he's noticing that it's powering up.
Yeah. And he walks backwards and he goes up the burn and he throws himself on the ground because it was lighting up so much. He thought it was going to explode again.
He's like, clearly this is something set up here.
Exploding before, but he thought it could explode. Some sort of radiation from it. He was always worried about the radiation he might be. And then
so is that at 2:45?
I think he pulled Burroughs down with him when he dove to the ground the second time.
So then he pulls him down, and now is this around 2:45 a.m.?
Yeah.
So there's considerable amount of time that's gone by because it didn't take them 2 hours to walk through the forest to get to it.
No, it was from 12, just after midnight, when Jim got the call and he left the Dow Hall to go to the East Gate.
So that's probably important to note that he spent a considerable amount of time investigating.
It was 20 minutes while they were at the East Gate talking on the phone to the control center when they told him he should go and investigate. That was 20 minutes. So, yeah, all this took some time. And
but what I'm saying is he didn't spend 2 minutes looking at this craft, getting all this information. He spent a little bit of time with it, investigating it, enough time to take all of these notes.
He thinks it was about 3/4 of an hour he was investing in the craft because his watch stopped for 45. It stopped 45 minutes when they got back to the control center and they realized their watch had stopped. And I think Burroughs he had a watch and it stopped as well. So there's 45 minutes missing.
So now it's 2:45 a.m. and he's noticing that it's lifting off the ground with no sound, no air disturbance, no other identified markings.
That's it.
All right.
Go to the next one.
And then it takes off, unknown speed, impossible. Do you want to talk about how it's maneuvering through the forest?
Yeah, so what happened was as it lit up really bright and he dove to the ground, it started to make its way back through the cliff. He said this was really strange because the trees were so close together, but in this clearing, they weren't so close. It had come down and it knocked branches off the trees. So it must have been a solid craft. But he said when it was maneuvering back away from them after it had lit up really bright, it seemed to go through the trees.
And not knocking anything over, not bumping into anything.
Yeah, it was weird. It was malleable. It didn't seem as if it was solid as it was making its way back through the trees. The trees were going through it, sort of thing. And then he said it lifted up slowly. And Burroughs came up behind him. He heard rustling behind him. Burroughs came up behind him. And they were both watching it. And it got to the canopy of the trees. It turned to the right, I think. It turned to the right slightly. And then it just zipped off. And he said it was in a blink of an eye. He said it's speed, speed impossible.
Speed impossible.
And then Burroughs said, there it is over there. So pointing to a light on the horizon from where they were. They followed the craft before it actually took off. And as it lifted up and it took off, John Burroughs said that he saw it. He saw the light again in the distance. Because by this time, they were out of that clearing and out of the forest, on the other side of the forest. You see where that field is, the farmer's field?
Yeah. So in this slide here, we can see the landing site, and then over to the right, you've got the farmer's field.
So when they got to the edge there of the forest, that's when Burroughs said that the light's over there. So he was telling Jim we just went off. He just ran off. And Jim thought, here we go. Jim was reluctant to do this because he'd already examined the craft. What would he want to follow it for?
His job is done. He's the first responder. This thing is leaving. He has the information. at this point, I'm going to go fill out a report now on what I've just observed.
Yeah, but he had to follow Burroughs
Like
because he was running off.
Yeah, I mean, his airman
The
is.
integrity of the team, he had to follow Burroughs, make sure wherever he
So,
was going, he had to follow him to bring him back.
so the light goes off in the distance, and Burroughs takes off, and Jim follows him to follow it through this farmer's field. And,
Yeah, it was waterlogged. It was waterlogged, and Jim fell down a few times.
and so now, like, he's covered in mud.
Yeah, tired, wet, and so they go past the animal barn, and they go into this other field, and they go to the left, and they go through that small aperture there, through two fields, and yeah, Burroughs stopped there, where Aaron Burroughs saw Beacon of Lighthouse. Penniston stopped.
So at this point,
and then he ran on further to that yellow line there, yellow dotted line. That's where he ran on further to that point.
okay,
But then Jim was calling him back. But Burroughs and then he realised what Burroughs was pointing to, and it was the light of the lighthouse on the
that's Orford Ness, correct?
On the beach, yeah, Orford Ness.
Okay. All right. And so then we have a couple more pages here from Jim Penniston's notebook. On the left, it's 23 December 80 flight schedule. So these are just previous pages.
Yeah, that's another example of Jim putting a date at the top of the page, which had to do with flight exercises. I added this to the book because John Burroughs, to try and put Jim down, because he went public after a while and they went their separate ways. Jim thought it was amicable. It was an amicable kind of split. John Burroughs wanted to pursue the Condign report. Jim wanted to carry on with the code. But when they split up, Burroughs was going public and running Jim down, tearing into his testimony. Because John, to this day, has said that he never saw any craft. He didn't. But it may be because he was in this kind of suspended state, he wasn't allowed through that, into that light, of influence of that light. So he said that Jim must have come up with a notebook years later.
Right.
Even though Burroughs hadn't seen everything that Jim had written in that notebook. He thought
nobody had for 30 years.
Yeah. Well, a few people did. There was a few people that saw the notebook. In fact, he was on the bus going back to the control center. Richard Bertolino, Airman Richard Bertolino, was sitting next to Jim, and Jim was sketching the craft in the notebook. And Richard Bertolino said, "God, you must have had such an experience out there." And he said, "Yeah, this was the craft." And he saw some of the pages in the notebook, and he came forward with that, saying that, yeah, he did see Jim Penniston write a notebook on the bus going back to the control center. Burroughs, to just discredit Jim, he's tried to say that, he must have come up with a notebook years later. And
it's probably also good to note that Bob Wood, Ryan S. Wood's father, did some forensic analysis on the paper and the notebook and the pen ink. And it's his estimation that it is from the time period. And so
he dated
further corroboration.
1980. Yeah, he dated to 1980.
And if you meet Jim Penniston, this isn't something he would cook up. I've talked to him a couple of times. This is not something he would do.
No, it's not at all. The thing is, on the other page here, and I put this on there just to give an example, that he was keeping notes, even at where he's saying, talk to Burroughs, meet at Crown and Anchor.
The Crown Anchor was a pub near where they would
and
go.
see Matthews Friday.
And this is all before the incident.
Yeah. So he had the notebook, before then. And there's these flight exercises in there. The next slide, yeah. So when Burroughs got to that point there, that's where he was looking at that's when Jim knew he was looking at the Orford Ness Lighthouse.
The craft is long gone at this point.
Yeah, and it was an unobstructed view of the lighthouse beacon, 1.8 miles from where they were on the beach there.
So then we have more pages here. So he's writing.
He wrote these notes here for the report. He was going to write out a report at the control center.
Okay.
Part of the page is missing.
Yeah, so he's got 0115 white, blue, and red, yellow lights. Woods investigated and observed. 2:30 undermined markings. 2:45 origin of the craft took off, trailed lights in the wood. 3:45 physical markings on forest floor, triangular measure, approximately 10 feet apart. So this is when he's measuring the distance between the depressions from the apparent landing gear made of light, correct?
Jim told me he wrote this out while he was on the bus, and that was when Richard Bertolino was sitting next to him.
Okay.
He was writing this out because he knew he had to fill in a report at the control center. So he wanted to
the
write
event's over, they're back at the control point, and they're on a bus back towards...
Yeah, so he wanted to write a list of everything he'd witnessed.
Okay.
In one go, so he could then transfer that to the report.
Okay. And then this is just...
Oh, the 20, see the 7 there? See, he's got a stem going through, sorry, a line going from the stem. That's how he writes his 7s, which is a European format. But that just goes to show that the 9 and 7s he writes down are different.
And then why don't we tell... So,
oh, yeah, I want to go back to that because that's the 27th. Okay. That's the 27th of December, 80. All right, so he wrote that on that page there to see if the pen worked, because it was on the morning of the 27th when he wrote down the binary code. So we have to just backtrack a bit. Yeah, during the incident and when he touched that large glyph, he had this download of, and he said he couldn't get out of his mind. He still kept seeing him in his vision. And that night, after the incident, after they went and did the report at the control center and all that, and they went back home, his home in Ipswich, he couldn't get asleep that night because he had these ones and zeros. And he said,
so this is the night of the 26th.
Night of the 26th, yeah.
Yeah.
He said it was just horrible, the feeling he had with it. And he thought he was going through some sort of trauma. But he thought, he got up and he made himself a cup of coffee and he thought, what if I was to write these down? Would I feel better? Yeah. So to see if the pen works,
okay, so to see if the pen works, this is what he writes.
Put down the 27th of December 80, which was that morning. I think it was around about 2 o'clock in the morning when he
on the 27th.
When he started to write the 1s and 0s down.
All right. So he tests the pen, he writes down the time. And now, just so everybody knows, this is just page 1 of 16 pages of this that he writes down and that he keeps in a notebook. Doesn't really show anybody. He's embarrassed about this, but he is able to get to sleep almost immediately after he writes down.
He felt better. He felt better
once he wrote down 16 pages of 1s and 0s that he assumed was complete nonsense and gibberish.
Yeah, he did. Even though he said that while his hand was on the glyph, the large glyph, he had the impression of what this was a message. And he picked up subliminally, he picked up some of the details of what the message contained. He said, subconsciously, subliminally, had that feeling about it. For him to have written out 1s and 0s, which when deciphered would come up with a legitimate message, he thought, no, that wouldn't happen. It would just be gibberish. He didn't have confidence in writing it out, a proper message in 1s and 0s. And anyway, he didn't know what binary code was at that time. This was binary code, but he didn't know what binary code was. And so all he saw was 1s and 0s, and he thought he was going mad. He thought he was going insane with the drama of the event. And it somehow, I don't know, just sent him crazy. And he was writing down his 1s and 0s. He thought, who does that? Who does that? So he was embarrassed about it. And after he wrote them down, even though he felt better, he just put the notebook in the drawer and wanted to forget about it.
Now, he doesn't report this because he has a serious job, right? Now, he does the report. He reports the incident, but he doesn't report this spat of madness of 1s and 0s of 16 pages of this because he doesn't want to lose his job. He has a very serious job of security of an Air Force base. He doesn't want to lose his job, so he doesn't tell anybody about this for decades now. Is that correct? Now, the only time this comes out is about 30 years later on the set for Prometheus Entertainment, which is filming an episode of Ancient Aliens.
which
is in 2010. And I think they're filming it in October of 2010.
October the 2nd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you want me to tell the story? Or do you want to tell it?
Yeah. There's some strange things around that time of the day. Let's just go back.
Okay.
Let's go back to 1980 when he was writing these down.
Okay.
He just wanted to forget about it. He didn't want to tell anybody. He thought he'd be committed. He'd lose his job, take a gun, lose his job. He'd probably be put in a mental institution or something. He didn't know what would happen, but he was worried about it and worried about his mental state of mind. So what he would do is because the notebook was a ring binder, take the pages out of the ones
without ripping them
and putting them back, put them either at the back of the notebook or he'd hide them somewhere else. Whenever he showed the notebook to people, they wouldn't see the ones and zeros. He was just so embarrassed about the whole thing. That was it. He never came about it at all. So, yeah, the day after, the morning he was actually writing these down, there was another incident at Rendlesham. Another sighting. That very morning, as he was writing these ones and zeros down, there was another sighting on the Woodbridge base from the East Gate. And I'm trying to think of her name now, but she was on the sentry. She was sentry duty, and she saw a white light again. It's in the woods. That's all in the book. I won't go. I'm just saying it was strange. That was happening at the same time when Jim was writing down the ones and zeros.
Right. There's a lot of strange things. Obviously, that's an important point because that happened that happened when he was writing down the ones and zeros.
Another incident was going on. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of strange things that happened all around that forest. And there's a lot of things that happened throughout the decades. Obviously, this case was being covered on multiple documentaries. It's one of the most famous UFO cases. Next to Roswell, I don't know any other case that's more famous than the Rendlesham Forest incident. And if you guys want to read all about that, the book is absolutely incredible. It's Jim Penniston's firsthand account of all of that.
Thanks.
Gary does a fantastic job. The book is thoroughly entertaining. But before we wrap this up, Gary, because I want this to lead into where we get with the code. So let's just talk about 30 years later, almost to the day, right? That
introduce
the
OSI.
Okay, all right. Let's talk about the OSI then incident.
So what happened was after he'd written down the ones and zeros, put the notebook away. He thought he was told to go and report the OSI building. There was OSI agents who wanted to talk to him about the incident. He took the pages of ones and zeros out the book, and he took the book with him, the notebook with him that morning. It was on the 29th of December when he was to report at the OSI building at 9 o'clock. He took the notebook with him and he took a sketch of the craft, and it was 3 vantage points.
Just for the audience sake, can you tell them what OFI is? Is the Office of Special Investigations?
Yes,
is
that's
that
it? That's it.
Okay, Office of Special Investigations. Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, so when he went, before he went there, that morning, he sketched the craft. He gave 3 vantage points of the craft. Well, aerial view, side view, front view, that kind of thing. So there's 3 sketches of craft on one piece of paper. He folded that up, put it in his pocket with the notebook. He was going to hand those over to the OSI agent. That was his intention. So he got to the OSI building. They sat him down. They said, "Do you want a coffee or Coke?" He said, "I'll have a Coke." They put a legal pad, yellow pages, lined legal pad in front of him. And they said, "We want you to write down a statement of what you witnessed, what you experienced." So he said he wrote it down, and he said he wrote 4 pages of his statement. And he wrote it all in pencil, and he signed it. He initialed each page, and they looked at it. They took it away. They went away for 20 minutes in there on his own, drinking his Coke. They came back 20 minutes later, and they put down this page of typed text.
One page.
Actually, the type. It was done on a typewriter, and it was only like 2/3 of the page, of one page, and it was a watered down,
completely watered down incident
version of what he'd written, leaving out a lot of the details, just giving a generic kind of view of what he witnessed. And so they said, from now, we want you to memorize this. We want you to memorize this so that when anyone ever asks you about what you experienced, this incident, that's what you'll take your testimony from. And so Jim didn't like that at all. He thought, this lies. And so, but he had to do what they said. They said, if you do this, it will all go away. We won't bother you anymore. You just take that half a page of typewritten text. That's your statement from now on. Even though it didn't have his name on it, he didn't sign it. It wasn't dated like the other, like
his written portion.
Your statement was. So really, it had nothing to do with Jim, even though it made its way onto the internet later. Found it, this half page of typewritten text, and they say that's Jim Penniston's statement, but it had nothing to do with him. It was written by the OSI agents, and as I said, it was just it was a very sanitized record of what he said he witnessed and what he experienced. And they've said since then, they've said that's his statement, that is his statement, and that's the end of the story, sort of thing. But
that's clearly not the case here.
That's clearly not the case. No, and anybody with any critical thinking skills would know
there's more going on here.
Yeah, because there's protocols in place for people when they write their statements, witness statements. It's got to be on legal pad. It's got to be lying. It's got to be dated. It's got to be signed. It's got to be initialed, which is what his first statement was. But yeah, so everyone fell in with that.
Everyone fell in line.
This was on the 29th of December when he went into the OSI building. Did that. He did his statement, and then it gave him this false statement. It's been attributed to Jim, but it's not anything to do with him. And
there were other shenanigans as well. Do you want to go into the other shenanigans?
Yeah, because the following day, which was the 30th, they asked him to come in again, but Jim doesn't really remember that. That time when he went in, then they gave him the sodium pentothal truth serum, and they hypnotized him. And when they got to the point where he had the download of binary code, they tried to block that from his memory by placing a block. So whenever he tried to remember that part of the incident, he'd hear a nursery rhyme.
So you're alleging that they knew that something...
They must have done from the sodium pentothal.
They got to the truth of it.
Administered that to him, and they hypnotized him, and they must have found out about the binary code download. But of course, they didn't know that it was already written out in his notebook. Oh yeah, and that was the other thing. He intended to give them the notebook and the sketch of the craft, but he left that the previous day when he went there on the 29th. That was the intention to hand those over. He walked out because he knew that when they gave him the sanitized statement that they wanted him to memorize and use, that they're lying. And he thought, I won't give him the notebook. I'll never see it again. So he walked out with the notebook. They never searched him either. He just walked out with the notebook and the sketch of the craft. But the next day they asked him to come back, or they got him to come back, but he doesn't remember because of the sodium pentothal he was administered and gnosis. And they put the block on his memory on the binary code. So whenever he tried to remember that part of the incident, all he would hear was someone reciting, a male voice reciting this nursery rhyme, Mary Had a Little Lamb. And he couldn't get past the block. That all came up later when he had his own hypnosis sessions.
He had therapy, regressive therapy.
Yeah, and it wasn't anything to do with finding out about the incident. It's because he had trouble getting to sleep. He had sleep disorder. And he went to a therapist about that. They gave him beta blockers to block his dreams and that because he was having nightmares. And so then the next step was to put him under hypnosis to see what all this was about the incident came out. And they realized there was a block on his memory and they removed it. The residue of that block still haunted Jim for years afterwards. Every time he tried to talk about the binary code download, he would sometimes just skip it and wouldn't talk about it.
Do you want to...
Oh, I just want to say one more thing about
the
30th of December. So it was on the 30th of December 1980 when they tried to suppress all knowledge of the binary code by putting that block on his memory. Exactly 30 years to the day later, when he was at Prometheus Entertainment, and John Barrows asked him for a date in the notebook, and he went through it. And his 1s and 0 pages, John Barrows saw them and said, "What's that?" And that's when it all started coming out about the binary code.
So he's on the set filming for Ancient Aliens. Yes. It's probably one of the early seasons, and they're doing an episode on the Rendlesham Forest. And so they have Jim Penniston and John Burroughs in there to talk about it and do clips for the episode. And Jim brought the notebook there. And in the back of the notebook, he's got the 1s and 0s, the 16 pages of it. And John Burroughs kind of glances over there as he's flipping through it, and he sees that, and he says, "What is that?"
And Linda Moulton Howe was standing behind Jim.
And Linda Moulton Howe is standing right there as well.
And then she said, "That's binary code, Jim. That's binary code."
So he felt compelled to tell the whole story. And we don't have to go into the detail of this, but Prometheus Entertainment had it had several pages decoded. Linda Moulton Howe had her people decode it.
Yeah. Both saying the same thing.
Yeah, it's both saying the same thing of the actual code that came out.
Prometheus Entertainment went ahead with the program they were filming, which was the last episode of the second series. And that was televised on the 30th of December, 2010. And they added a section about the binary code. Yeah. Because it was found out on the Prometheus Entertainment film set. And so they thought they could use that in the episode. Okay. The first 5 pages was made public on the 30th of December, 2010, which is exactly 30 years to the day when the OSI agents tried to suppress all knowledge of the code. It was televised 30 years later.
Exactly 30 years to the day that it was, trying to be suppressed. So that's another one of those synchronistic things that happen that's associated with this event.
It could be that the intelligence behind the code had made that happen somehow. It just made sense that they would do that 30 years to the day, so it would be more significant. There's something to all this.
Yeah, and maybe we should just wrap it up with this as a little teaser for the next podcast. Maybe we should just show what the code said here. I'm trying to find it. I don't know. Did you ever email it to me, Gary?
Might have done.
I had it here somewhere. Maybe this is it.
But perhaps the one thing I do want to get across, which is what I said to you earlier, before we do wrap it up, is the timeline. As I said, Jim Penniston said that it happened just after 12 when he got the call to go to the East Gate, just after 12. And John Burroughs wrote in his statement, in his witness statement, that it started 3 o'clock in the morning. That can't be. When you look all those dates, all those times in what Jim wrote.
That's not when it started.
They are consistent with the timeline that Jim remembers, which was it happened just after midnight, and the craft took off at 2:45 in the morning. That's a quarter of an hour before Burroughs said it all started. And in Burroughs' different statements he's given over the years, different interviews he's done, he's given different times. He said it's 2 o'clock. It started 2 o'clock in the morning. It started 2:45. It started 3 o'clock. But he put 3 o'clock in his witness statement. And then there was two other statements, one written by Lieutenant Burayan, who also put the time of 3 o'clock. He started happening 3 o'clock. And then Chandler, I think Master Sergeant Chandler, in his statement, he wrote 3 o'clock as well. And I think what happened there is that once Burroughs had written down 3 o'clock, they thought, 3 o'clock coincides with a meteorite that was seen in the skies over Rendlesham Forest that same morning. So it's as if they wanted to make it coincide with this meteorite so they could put doubt in people's minds about what this is and it was all about. So they used Burroughs' timing of 3 o'clock in the morning to do that. And they had the other 2 statements. They had them go along with it. The real timeline must be Jim's, where he said it started just after 12 midnight.
I want to see if I can find this, because you sent this to me.
I'm just going to say that there were 3 events over those 3 days, from the 26th to the 28th. There were 3 different events. And Jim wasn't there for the 3rd event, which involved Colonel Holt. So that's the reason why we're not really talking about that. It's in the book, but I just wanted to concentrate on the incident that Jim witnessed and experienced.
And so this is what was decoded or derived out of the ones and zeros. This was some verbiage, and we have some coordinates here. And in the next episode, I really want to get to the Giza coordinates, because that's really one of the more fascinating things that you've uncovered with this code. But
Yeah.
you want to take us through real quick what this all was and how this came about, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, this was the full message. This was 16 notebook pages of ones and zeros. And this what was deciphered from those ones and zeros. So, exploration of humanity, 6668100, first line. Second line was the coordinates for High Brazil. That's how the Irish pronounce it. Not High Brazil, it's High. And that's the coordinates target a location just off the southwest coast of Ireland. Which was once, they say, that was an island that became submerged, and every now and again it will rise to the surface again, and then will submerge again. And it's very mythical, going back to the mythical lore of Ireland. This was a land, this was the homeland for the Tuatha De Danann. They were seen as paranormal or supernatural beings.
I'll say that I watched a video on someone that did there's some geographic work. I don't know if it's GIS or what, but they've noticed that there is a bump in the ocean floor off of Ireland that they think is where this might have been before the end of the last ice age, because sea levels rose and it probably got submerged.
Yeah, I mean, there's satellite imagery where they're using different colored filters, seeing it infrared, and you can see that there's something just under the surface of the water there. That looks likely. Okay, so the next line is continuous for planetary advance. Fourth coordinate, continuous sequence probe 4. Jim said that he had a feeling what the message was saying, and he did pick up on the sequence probe part subliminally, as it came up later. And when he did that interview with, I'm trying to think of her name now, name's gone out of my mind, but he did an interview where he said that, yeah, I knew what the message meant, but for me to write out in ones and zeros the message where it all made sense, he said, I'm sure that I would have just written out a load of gibberish and adjust this. Yeah. And people leapt on that, saying he contradicted himself. He said he knew what the message meant, but then he said it was gibberish.
Right.
But there is a distinction there. Anyway.
Then we have these 6 other sets of coordinates that are Caracol, Belize, Sedona, Arizona, Giza, Egypt. We have the Nazca lines in Peru. We have Taishan in China. And then we also have, what's that one? Is that Greece? Naxos, Greece?
Yeah. Yeah, there's an old ruined temple there, and all that's standing is this, it looks like a window, great large window across the Mediterranean.
And you have eyes of your eye. Was there some discrepancy? Was it eye of your eyes or eyes of your
because last, they thought it might be eyes of your eyes. But the last letter was a G. And so they thought that didn't make sense. So there was transmission errors that had to be corrected, which Joe Luciano tried. I think he corrected quite a bit of it. And then Daniel Davis did in 2022. It was Daniel Davis that said that the last letter was not an S, it was a G, and it didn't make sense. Out. Then you've got origin, and you've got the same coordinates again for High Brazil. So the High Brazil coordinates are given twice in the message for some reason. And then you've got origin year 8100, and that's up there in the first line. But origin year 8100 doesn't mean that 8100 is BC, is a BC. Right. I found out that it's an AD date, it's in the future. But
and we're talking about your work with the coordinates.
It could be the date when the code was sent back, or it's got some kind of significance in the future. Yeah.
And just for the audience's sake, Gary has done, how many years have you worked on? 14 years he's spent looking at the locations, finding mathematical and geometric connections with this. And really what the astonishing thing is what you've done on the Giza Plateau. Even before this, I think maybe your work before this, laying the groundwork so that you could take that nondescript location of Giza and really look at the secrets that Giza's been giving up, since you've applied that to your style of decoding mathematical constants, geometric relationships, and fascinating information. And we're going to get into that podcast to come. But I thought this would be a good podcast, a good introductory to lay the foundation for where this all comes from, because when you look at who Jim Penniston is and you look at this incident, this is a very fascinating and interesting thing that came up. And I think it's important to lay the foundation on that before we dive into the other work.
Jim has always said it's always been about the code. That's what the incident, it's why the incident happened. And
what else is there?
The way the code authenticates itself by giving us a demonstration of retrocausality. That it means that 1980 was significant to give this demonstration of retrocausality and how it authenticates itself, which we'll go into later. But yeah, the Giza coordinates are what I focused on really, because I already knew a lot about Giza anyway, as part of my research work and the book I wrote with Scott Crichton, The Giza Prophecy. In fact, Jim Penniston, who asked me to look at the code, and I didn't know what the code was at the time when he asked me, and he sent me the remaining sets of coordinates, 6 sets of coordinates. He sent them to me on the 2nd of February, 2011. And that was when I started working on the code. Yeah, and he commissioned me to do it. But yeah, 14 years I've been working on it.
I can say firsthand, because you've taken me through a lot of your work over the last several months, and I can say it's utterly fascinating work. And I really can't wait to share it with the rest of my audience, what you've done. It's astonishing work that you've done, Gary. But I want to thank you for coming on and helping me lay the foundation for this. I've been wanting to do this with you for a while. This was really great.
My pleasure.
Anything you want to leave anybody with before we sign off here?
Yeah, I think this has been a good kind of segue into the code, really. In fact, what we've just gone over about the incident is what Jim wanted to do. He wanted to write the book about the incident, about what he experienced and the aftermath, which would lay the foundation for the findings of the code in the next book. And I've been working on that for the last 5 years. But the book I wrote with Jim Penniston, the first book, which was the book 1, that took 5 years to research and write. So yeah, it takes time. But I'm not one of those people who just knock books out just for the money side of things. I like to make sure that what I write and get published is worth it for the reader. It's worth their money.
Yeah, and I can second that. I know that other people have said this. You're very humble about your work, but the time, the energy, and the intelligence that you've put behind this work is second to none. It's for anybody that hasn't checked out the Rendlesham Enigma, it's a fantastic read. It's as good as any book is on the Rendlesham incident, and it also has Jim's work, which is the beginning of his deciphering of the code at the back of that book, and then which will lead into book 2, which hopefully will be out soon. But we're going to go into a lot of that work in an upcoming podcast. So stay tuned for all of that.
Thank you, Matt.
Gary, this was awesome.
Thank you.
We're going to sign off for now. Stay tuned for the next podcast coming out.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching the show. I hope you guys are enjoying the content. If you're finding any value, please hit that subscribe button, that like button, and leave a comment. It doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps out the show.